Hughes in particular, Mr. Chiglail, but Prime Minister Schill, his elf Hinch, and their huff cannot be laud to monsterize our discussion. What about the female Occidental? To illustrate the why Miss Adelbody Schillersoft eels around the manor, how's about turning over to the chase of an humble ice-flown for westward after-chain, Uncle Turtom, living but weary-king in a circus, a lowly sweeper-upper in behind of a fortifant. We journ old Tom so collared, one day shortly after what, if we be linguistically correct, we must call the second intergenerational, untralinguistic, anti-Republican confrontation. We find him subbing and watching his foolifant, tinking with the idea of putting roast shocks in a box and selling two for the one fantastically new punnet, when his boss told her, the on hands dan Schillersif, executionerative prosistant of the run the world grab a piece and bargain 'em fightin', sure of course.
Hello, dear listeners. You just heard a reading from the subject of today's episode, Dunfords Travels Everywheres by William Melvin Kelley, the 1970 novel, which is the subject of today's episode. That section was read by William Melvin Kelley's wife, Ike, who also did the illustrations that were included in that 2020 edition, which John and I read for this episode. One of the reasons I wanted to share this with you all before today's episode is that this book is a unique case, and then sections of it are written in a kind of pun-based black vernacular speech, which includes elements of Jamaican patois and other accents, and which is inspired by a similar kind of vernacular speech, pun-based writing of James Joyce. Rather than attempting somewhat ignorantly to render this on the podcast, John and I decided to forego our usual readings of sections from the book, but I thought it would be worth it to include a section of Ike reading it, just to set the table, as it were. And if you're interested, you can check out the full video on YouTube, where they read it in sort of celebration for the 2020 edition of the book. Today's episode was really fun, and if this intro isn't a hint as to what we get into, we end up talking about modernist literature, Kelley's decision to render black speech into writing, the ways speech can be oppressive, and also the pleasures of reading something so stylistically impressive that you forego attempting to completely follow everything and you just kind of enjoy the show. So, in other words, this is a classic Infinite Library spring-based modernist madness episode. And as always, we hope you enjoy the conversation. Nice. I'm gonna get this rip on camera.
Open mine.
Gotta have my Celsius, otherwise I can't do anything.
You'd have my Celsius or else I'll kill myself.
I can't remember, there's a quote where Nietzsche was talking about like avoid drinking coffee because it gives me a black depression, and I think about that like all the time now. It's just like Nietzsche being like, why am I so depressed? Like,
I think about was it Kant the one who, like, when he didn't have his coffee, to be like, I'm drowning. And then when his servants would bring him coffee, he's like, land, I see land.
Just so exhausted and bitter. Yeah.
that feels very relatable to me in terms of my relationship to diet soda.
Yeah. When you're about to get a DC, land, I see land.
No servants to bring it to me though, which is a disappointment. I also found myself wondering, as I was reading this, I was talking with Aaron a couple days ago, and I was like, yeah, I'm reading this book called Dunfords Travels Everywhere for the podcast, and it's mostly written in incredible, not mostly, but large sections of it are written in the thickest I don't even know what to describe it as exactly, because it's not quite like, it's not quite AAV. It's kind of like, it's clearly like playing certain things up for comedic effect, but I don't want to be like, oh, it's doing minstrelry, because that feels like it's not doing like coonskin, though I guess that's also not bad. Like,
there's also like a lot of Jamaican patois too.
Yeah, it's just like.
Well, what's crazy too is like, I think when I sat down to read Finnegan's Wake, I didn't realize that when you read it out loud, it just sounds Irish. Mm-hmm. And then it's a similar thing here where you're like, oh, it's a black author doing a James Joyce inspired stuff. And then when you read it, you're like, this kind of sounds like AAVE, and then you're just like, well, why wouldn't it? But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because like I indulge in like audio books a little bit more, but I do find myself when I'm reading something that's clearly like this, or I haven't read Finnegan's Wake or Ulysses at this point, so I can't speak to Joyce, but I've read other books that, have like clearly like a phonetic approach to like how it's writing, certain sections. And I do tend to like, if I'm finding myself struggling to like pick apart what is actually being said, I do tend to try reading out loud, and I find that helps.
Yeah.
I did do that, but luckily completely unrecorded, so no one can accuse me of anything. No one can clip this out of context.
Yeah, I was speaking in AAVE in the safety of my own home.
Be careful before you try this one at home, kids. I put on my motorcycle helmet and my safety pads before I start talking like Drake when he really was to sound Jamaican on like a B tier track.
Yeah, like my notes had to do with a little bit of the modernist context, and then there's a little bit about the Black Arts movement, which I wanted to touch on because I feel like I had one of those serendipitous moments where I have a book of Ishmael Reed's essays, and I just opened it randomly and saw William Melvin Kelley's name, and I went, "Oh!" And like, so that's like what that quotation's from. So
I'm glad that is the case, because like I did find myself thinking of Ishmael Reed as I was reading this, and I'm glad that wasn't just me being like, two black guys.
Racism avoided. I also want to bring up how in Gravity's Rainbow at one point Thomas Pynchon just goes, read Ishmael Reed, he knows more about these things than I do.
I'm looking at Kelly's Wikipedia page right now. Did you know this is actually very funny considering the conceit of this season? William Kelley, the man who invented woke.
Yes, I have a thing about that, which is totally woke, like
you dig it.
Yeah, which is totally like I didn't realize it until I sat down to put some notes together. I'm like, oh, it's the man who invented woke, which I don't think he technically did, but he did put it in the paper of record when it was being like reclaimed.
It's the first time we have it like in print. Okay.
It's also in the context of him seeing a sign that says, here's how you could speak in beatnik. And he goes, you mean speak black? Which I think
Daddy-o, you got the right hoo-hoo, but the wrong ho-ho.
Yeah, the most sexual style John Candy performance. Yeah, John Candy's sexual style is when he's playing the jive talking Southern lawyer. You're barking up the wrong tree, Daddy-o. I have a thing about that. I have a thing about the Black Arts movement. There are several sections of this book, and I was going to ask you if you picked up on any of the like Wagner stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of Norse stuff in here. Somebody says by Tivas.
Yeah, that went pretty much like way over my head. So maybe you can like touch on that a little bit, even though we might not be able to say anything coherent about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's stuff there. I got most of the way through that essay you sent over today.
Oh, hell yeah. Okay.
Touches on that a little bit more directly.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's doing a ton like with it outside of like, William Melvin Kelley, very smart, well-read dude who knew about these things. And it's like, oh, this is like white people. I mean, it is kind of like, not to hate, but it is kind of like white people drive like this, black people drive like this.
Except the white people are like, evil.
Yeah,
so,
well, you can drive like this and be evil.
Also, I was gonna touch on something. I feel like the epigraph from Palm Wine Drunkard was literally what you were talking about in the chainsaw episode, where you're like, what would be the perspective of white people from the indigenous perspective? And it's this. We slept in that bush, but when it was about 2:00 at night, then we saw a creature. Either he was a spirit or other harmful creature we could not say. He was coming toward us. He was white as if painted with white paint. He was white from foot to the topmost of his body, but he had no head or feet and hands like human beings, and he got one large eye on his topmost. He was long about 1/4 of a mile, and his diameter was about 6 feet. He resembled a white pillar. At the same time that I saw him coming toward us, I thought what I could do to stop him, then remembered a charm which was given to me by my father before he died. So the idea of just like a white slug walking towards you, and that's like the one epigraph from Palm Wine Drunkard I thought was very interesting. So,
especially considering that guy's probably either English or German or Dutch.
Right, yeah. just
not even like an attractive type of white person.
Just like a tentacle monster. So, like,
just a bog creature.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a little like maybe far afield, but just on that same topic, one of my favorite like just little historical fun facts is just like how freaked out the Aztecs were by horses.
Yeah.
When like the Spanish first arrived, they thought that they were basically like centaurs because they'd never seen a horse before.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know if like the Aztecs would have seen llamas. Like, I think that that's even like a little further south. Like,
right. Yeah. The Incas. Yeah.
Like this was like imagine the closest equivalent I can think is like, oh, someone like rides up to you on a giant deer.
Right.
It's covered in metal.
Yeah. Like those like paintings of them being like the same thing or like, merging together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's crazy, man. Colonialism is bad, but also just crazy. Like, what was up with that?
Yeah, what was the deal?
Okay, I do think there is actually something to that with this book, which, again, like this is something I've often found myself thinking about at certain points when I've read through the history of our great nation, Ben, and that is, man, slavery was sure crazy. Like, the idea of just doing that is just crazy.
Yeah, it really does boggle the mind. Like the idea that you would just regard an entire set of people as like a resource which you could then expropriate and use like basically without their consent. Like, it's yeah.
You know, I've been listening to a podcast recently, Past Lives, which is a podcast by Patrick Wyman, who's a historian. And there's a new show of his, and each season is like going to be looking at like a different like aspect, like a different like type of person throughout history. Mm-hmm. And this first season he just finished up was on slavery. And so he starts with like ancient Mesopotamia and like finishes with like the last African, like enslaved African brought to America.
Oh, wow.
And obviously like slavery is such like a unfortunately like universal institution throughout much of human history that like he couldn't cover everything, obviously.
Right.
But something that struck me in that, and I know it sounds like we're getting very tangential right now, but I do promise this does tie into the book. At least I think it does. Like the ancient perspective on slavery like seems, I'm not going to say healthier, but like if you read like the ancient Greeks or whoever on slavery, I mean, yes, you do have like people like Aristotle who were like, oh yeah, Thracians are natural slaves.
Right.
But a lot of times it was just like, oh yeah, it's just a bad thing that can happen to you. And if it does, it sucks, but you know, could happen to anybody.
Yeah, and that's like, you know, pre-capitalist. And so like the intersection of slavery and capitalism and the triangle trade. And, you know, there's an argument to be made that like, I can't remember certain racist depictions of African Americans was like the first kind of brand marketing. Like the idea that this brand is something that you can buy and possess for your own labor. Like, yeah, that sort of intersection is quite disastrous given previous pre-capitalist notions where it's kind of just like something that can happen. Yeah. Like, unfortunately,
like obviously like still horrific and unjust and blah, blah, blah. But it like, I don't know. I know we've kind of something of a theme on the show. We talk about like historical fiction and older fiction is kind of like the way that like our ability to abstract thinking like increases over time. And the way that like in the case of slavery, it just becomes a truly like ever more horrifying thing rather than most of the time, which that usually leads to good things when we could think more abstractly about them.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then without getting like, too Hegelian, it's like it's important to come back down to particulars at some point. Otherwise, otherwise you end up substituting the abstraction for the thing. So, yeah. With that out of the way,
a meandering cold open to a book that you could perhaps describe as meandering. However, meandering does not mean bad. In fact, I'd say that the title itself even kind of lays that out right on the nose. I'll just say right now, I apologize, Ben. I noticed as I was reading this that I actually put this one down wrong on our season announcement sheet.
Oh, really?
I put down Dunfords Travels Everywhere. No, actually, this week we're reading Dunfords Travels Everywheres by William Melvin Kelley.
And crucially, which we'll get into, Dunfords has no possessive comma, which is also a clue, as we'll get into. And I'm quite excited to talk about this book. I'm your host, Ben, by the way.
I'm your host, Hepcat John.
Yeah, and
that's right. I'm down. I'm cool. I'm with it.
We're going to merge together into one consciousness over the course of this episode, like the protagonists of this book. But I must confess, John, I was hinting about this before we started recording. Every so often I get what I can only describe as spring fever madness, and I want to read like modernism, and not like necessarily we could say the T.S. Eliot's, the Ezra Pounds, all those are in there, but also just like people that are attempting to like particle accelerator smash the English language. And I can't really explain this. And I feel like if I didn't have a podcast where I could talk to somebody about it, I wouldn't do it as often. But I feel like sometimes it's important to see people attempt to destroy or render the written word in different ways. Cause I feel like William Melvin Kelley is not trying to destroy it so much as use it for his own purposes. And that's definitely what happens in this book.
Yeah. I get what you're saying there, Ben. Love just like a seasonal reading madness. I also get those from time to time. I mean, obviously, the Infinite Library, we're on record. We're a modernist podcast.
Yes.
We love modernism. We love, using the English language like the like nag that it is, and just riding it as hard as we can into the sunset. Unlike the postmodernists who just kind of shrug and don't ride the horse anywhere.
Yeah, in fact, they're scared of the horse. Yeah. So.
But no, I mean, I found myself kind of struck because when you first suggested this book, Ben, you mentioned, this is like a modernist black novel, indebted in a lot of ways to Joyce, while also not being like 700 pages long.
Crucially, yeah.
But I didn't realize when I picked it up that it was written when it was. This book came out when again?
1970, I believe.
1970, which I mean, obviously it's hard to like exactly pin down like when there are hard boundaries on this stuff, but like we're out of the era of like, as absurd as this feels to say, like classic high modernism.
Yes, quite definitively so. Yeah.
And yet like this book feels to me at least, like just as vital as something like Nightwood did.
Yeah.
This does not feel like a book that's like being written at the time when a lot of authors were like, oh my gosh, like there's nowhere we can push this forward unless we just like lose the idea of forward altogether. And I found that interesting. That's as so frequently happens to be the case, like comes out of Black arts movements in America, but also just like I don't know. I think I don't know if I want to say I think a lot because this is kind of a half-baked idea, but I've been thinking, I think a lot about genre, obviously, big theme on the show, and the weird way that genres proliferate not just like through a particular time, but through like all time. Particularly now, I feel like we've talked about it, in terms of the way that like aesthetics and things like kind of they're just floating out there in the ether for people to grab at.
Yeah, definitely.
And there can be issues with that because sometimes like it becomes so abstract that like people are using these tropes or these images or these conventions without really understanding like what made them feel vital at the time. And it just becomes like kind of a stale exercise or, just kind of an aesthetic, a totally aestheticized object with no reference to like reality.
Or tradition even. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that like with this book, I found myself thinking about is the fact that like, oh, like you can still write like a modernist novel.
Yeah.
Now, can you make a lot of money writing it? Can you get it published? Obviously, that's a whole different can of worms. But like the tools are still good,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and along those lines, I want to put William Melvin Kelley in the Black arts movement, because I think it's related to what you were saying, where based on my limited knowledge being also like a white person, the Black arts movement was sort of like this, not exactly civil rights, but more about like Black artistic identity, Black artistic creation that wasn't necessarily trying to make integration part of the thing. And I have a book of Ishmael Reed essays. Ishmael Reed is a great Black author. Thomas Pynchon even shouts him out in Gravity's Rainbow, where he starts talking about race, and then he goes, actually, you should read Ishmael Reed, who knows more about these things than I do. And I just opened the book randomly, and in a nice serendipitous moment, I saw William Melvin Kelley mentioned. And so Ishmael Reed puts him in this camp. The younger generation in many ways has modified the reading list, or in some cases thrown it out altogether and substituted their own. Compare W.E.B. Du Bois' The Quest of the Silver Fleece to young Larry Neal's forthcoming Hoodoo Bebop Galloping Ghost, and the careful reader who is not simply seeking story or what it's all about can readily discern the revolution in consciousness and aesthetics that has occurred. Askia Muhammad Tori's use of Islamic aesthetics, Amira Baraka's experiments with African and Black urban languages, Mike Harper's anchoring his poetry in the music of John Coltrane, David Henderson's use of Zen, yoga, rock and roll, the best of the dozens of writers, and Stephen Cannon's erotic New Orleans, not English fantasies. All of this work indicates an unparalleled experimentation towards overcoming the consciousness barrier erected by the alliance of Eastern Black pseudo-nationalists and white mundanists who in the 1960s sought to dominate Afro-American intellectual thought with their social realist position papers and promoting those works that made them feel better on the basis of critical standards vaguer than even that. While the classical Christian generation prided itself in its competence in Western languages, William Melvin Kelley learned French in order to talk to French-speaking blacks in many parts of the world. The result is the marvelous and underrated Dunfords Travels Everywhere. The new generation seems to have decided that self-determination begins with the head. And so I think there's a interesting moment this book's coming out of that you're talking about, John, where people are reaching for other artistic things. And Kelley just happened to reach for basically like, what can I use James Joyce for to talk about the ways that like language influences your mindset on your identity and on colonialism and like, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like I said, I don't know if that'll make it into the podcast proper. I haven't read any Joyce, actually. It's one of my many shames.
Wait, side note, Gilbert Sorrentino refers to James Joyce as Shame's voice. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but after reading this, like I'd say I'm actually even more interested in reading Joyce. Not to say like, oh, Joyce is gonna be better than this necessarily. It'll be different. But if this is like what Joyce was doing for like Irish literature of, you know, his era, if he was doing something that feels like this fresh and interesting and experimental, like I really want to get to reading Joyce. But we're not here to talk about Joyce except in relation to Dunfords Travels Everywheres. Ben, wanted to say thank you for pointing out the obvious. That is that Ben and I are both very white people.
If you hadn't guessed, yeah. So.
Yeah. Sorry if you were betting on one of us being. I don't even know what you would bet on. It feels kind of racist to even say that someone could have mistaken us for anything other than white. But yeah, you have one Franco German Hibernian in me, and Ben, you're correct. Polish Italian.
Yeah. Yeah, or so, as my dad would say, anytime I do anything backwards, that's the Polish part. So
I mean, but hey, no English, no Dutch. So
marked safe. Yeah.
I know I'm part German, but from the Alsace, I just consider it to be more French, frankly. Anyway, this is a. So I bring that up because this book is. I mean, I think we're both on the record. We like the book. We think the book's great.
Yeah.
This is a book that a lot, I think, is almost certainly going over our heads to some degree. There's also definitely there are sections of this book that we cannot read out loud without sounding racist. So,
yeah, let's reveal the conceit of the book in that when characters are dreaming, it is written in a like black vernacular that is almost entirely made up out of puns. And so it's like just basically direct black vernacular. There's some Jamaican patois. There's other dialects getting mixed together. And then there are the moments when the characters are not sleeping or dreaming, where it's sort of just like almost like a straight realist novel, I guess we could say. And it's that.
I mean, I don't know about all that. I don't know. I'd say that like it gets about as realist as Pynchon does.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good point. Yeah. So
then we start in like the Decreccio country.
Yeah. The opening setting is in like a not quite real European country. So.
Oh my God. This part was, I don't know if it's the funniest part of the book. It's the part that made, because I like kind of not knowing what I was getting into when I started this book.
I wanted to ask you about that because the way the rug pull happens in this book is kind of incredible. So yeah, yeah.
Because like it starts off with this thing where it's like you find out that there are like these two, that basically they're in this like town in this kind of like strange, I think like vaguely Mediterranean European country. It feels like, I initially thought it was Portugal because the language that he's using for these people like looks vaguely Portuguese.
Yes, yeah.
In my opinion. And we find out that like there are like two groups based on like the color of clothing that people wear. And they're strictly segregated.
Yeah, and you wake up in the morning and you decide which side you're going to wear the clothing as.
Yeah, you're going to be yellow or red, I think.
Yeah, or no, it's like yellow, red, or like red, blue, right? Or
yeah, something like that. So, you know, at first I was like, is this like a soccer thing? Like...
Is a sports ball happening? Yeah.
Well, I thought we were maybe in like a real country, and then we get to the Turas, Las Turras, which are these 3 towers, which have been built to commemorate the many times this tiny country has been invaded and conquered by Attila the Hun and other such sundry folks. And it is the only place in the country where it is legal to commit suicide.
Yeah, because you can jump off the tower, right? Yeah. So. Yeah, and like they basically they're like looking at the towers, and then like to your sports ball reading, there's also like some kind of a riot going on in part of this scene as well. So.
Yeah, so I remember like I saw the thing about the towers and I was like, well, surely that can't be real. So I was like, but maybe the language, maybe it is still Portuguese. So I clipped out the like little section of my e-reader, copy pasted that, and it was like nothing came up, and I was like, oh, this is a completely made up language in a completely made up country.
Some people think it's Esperanto is some people who describe, but like I don't know enough to say if it's Esperanto or not. So
I feel like if I searched like Esperanto is enough of a thing, I think it would have popped in there.
Yeah,
that was Esperanto. I mean, I don't know for sure. I mean, I guess we could find out, but I don't know. That seems a little besides the point.
And so like this is the backdrop in which one of the protagonists, whose name is Chig Dunford, is just trying to play softball with his colleagues, basically.
Yes. So Chig Dunford is kind of I'd say he's our protagonist. He is a Harvard-educated black man who has spent the last several years kind of bumming around Europe, taking in the sights, having fun, meeting interesting people, doing interesting things. And at the time we meet him, he's kind of fallen in with, I guess we could call like kind of a crew of like Euro beatniks.
Yes. Yeah.
Again, it felt like this. Some of these bits really did remind me of Pynchon, in that like, oh, this is like if Pynchon had like one black guy who was part of the whole sick crew, and this would be like, what if that book was written from his perspective and he was just watching all these white people be really weird?
Yeah, be really weird. Ask him for like his opinion on like racial issues in a very strange way. The fact that he's one of them is in like he's sort of like into them, but he doesn't know what to do about it. It's quite it's very close on his perspective during these scenes. It's very whole sick crew, and that like some of them just kind of suck. So
yeah, I mean, and like I don't know, there's also some stuff in here that feels pretty, like I found pretty like emotionally affecting. Like there's this bit where he's having kind of like a lover's quarrel with like his kind of on again, off again, like girlfriend in this group. And she like accuses him of raping her, but like, it's clear that she's just using that as like a synecdoche for like anytime he does anything to frustrate her. She's just saying that that's him raping her because he's black.
Yeah. and like there's that bit where he like gets a boner, and then like they're like the woman that it starts like pointing it out in a weird way. like and he's just like, you've been touching me this whole time, like I'm sorry. Like basically.
Yeah. So there's kind of this like, I don't know if I want to call it like vaguely sinister. It doesn't come across as horrific exactly, but there's this way in which like he is clearly being kept at kind of a remove from this group because of his race, but he doesn't quite want to see it. Let me tell you, Ben, I don't know if you've ever had this experience as you were reading a book for the show, where you were kind of like, man, I wish I had time to do all this supplementary reading for this. Because part of you is like, man, I really wish I'd read more Fanon before I started reading this.
Yeah. I think that's definitely at play here, as well as just the idea of being like it's, well, W.E. Du Bois has mentioned in that Ishmael Reed thing, like the idea of double consciousness, where Chig is aware of how he's being perceived to a very high degree, as well as being aware of what he thinks about things. And wouldn't you know it, John, it's a 70s novel. That means JFK gets killed. However, it's not JFK. It's like some other guy. He gets killed at a baseball game, which I thought was pretty great. And the crew of people, some of which are Americans, start singing a pseudo national anthem that's not quite the one we know. And they ask Chig, don't you feel patriotic? And he says, no, motherfucker. And he offends everyone. And then basically Chig is like, where did that word come from? At which point then the book does like a rug pull and suddenly we're in James Joyce like dream language, and Chig is now someone else, which we'll get to later, and he's being addressed by a professor. And I was thinking about how the way this section starts, it really feels like you just wake up in class and the professor is talking at you without you like being aware of what's happening. And so the dream professor starts lecturing to him about the idea of blackness in again, as we've said, like dream speech that's like full of puns, references to historical people. Did you see that Freud is referred to as fraud?
Yes.
Yeah, see fraud. And so like then you realize, oh, this book is it's got a lot more going on than I realized. So
yeah, like I said, this definitely felt like the point where for me, I realized that I was like strapped in on like the roller coaster and it was going places I did not expect.
Yeah, the horse we referred to in the opening is just galloping down the hill at that point. So yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I went into this, I was expecting like I think that like that initial section was kind of what I was expecting.
Yeah.
I was maybe expecting it to like get like wackier as it went on. But I was not quite expecting like a third of this book to be written in dream speech.
Yeah. And if I could just do one aside to James Joyce, it's interesting that Kelley makes the wise decision to ease you into it, because Finnegan's Wake just kind of throws you into the deep end. And it's not until a significant way into Finnegan's Wake that it becomes, in quotes, normal sounding. And it's still like not normal sounding, but like it has to do with the whole structure of that book. Anyway, I feel like Kelley was like making a smart decision to realize that he wanted people to like kind of get into it before he starts doing the tough stuff, even though like to me, reading this kind of pun language is like looking at one of those magic eye paintings where like you'll be staring at it and you'll be like, I have no idea what this means. And then suddenly it'll snap into focus and you'll be like, yeah, okay, I can kind of tell what he's saying here, but I don't understand completely everything.
Yeah. There were definitely like sections where, like I said earlier, like a lot of this, I think, just went right over my head for somewhat obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But every so often, like you said, you'll see like a word or you'll see like a pun that makes sense to you. And it's like, oh, this thing snap into place. And suddenly like you're able to decipher like this particular portion of what's going on. Especially considering like these sections are like feel very stream of consciousness. They do feel, dreamlike in that way. There's not like exactly a plot happening in these sections.
Yeah.
There's not exactly like a story you're following here. It feels like a lecture, but it feels like a lecture being given to you by I don't even know.
By the dream professor. Yeah. So yeah, another great bit in the dreams professor section, which is the first dream section, is the phrase, I think it's griefed of servilization. So like in the pun way, that would be gift of civilization, but the pun is griefed of servilization, which is one of those like instances where he's compressing like the idea of basically like civilization, like white civilization being grief causing to the people it enslaves, basically. And I think like that kind of thing happens in ways that is almost sometimes hard to decipher, but sometimes you'll pick up on it and you'll be like, oh, I get it. Like that makes total sense. So,
well, I think that, and again, this might be one of those points where I'm speaking a little bit out of my depth here, but bear with me, listeners, and bear with me, Ben. I feel like, he's doing something really, really cool here with, again, kind of using the English language for all it's worth. and in particular, like using Black language, I think that, if we do have any listeners outside of the States, I think that it can be a little bit hard to understand kind of the racial politics of language in America and the way that certain forms of diction are just assumed to be A, racialized, but B, also like those racialized dialects are inherently wrong in some way.
Yeah.
That like, despite them being, intelligible, and despite the fact that, these people have been speaking this language their whole lives and also had it forced on them, like that if you're not speaking in this particular way, which is also tends to be like very staid, very not playful, that's the right way to speak. And I think that there's something he's doing here where he's using the English language for all it's worth, using the fact that African American vernacular English tends to be a lot looser with the way certain words are pronounced, to pull those puns out in ways that maybe on the page look a little awkward, but then if you actually speak them, they make a lot more sense. But there's kind of this dual level thing here where if you just were speaking them, you wouldn't see the pun necessarily because you'd be reading more phonetically. So you kind of both have to like read and speak to like fully get the levels that he's working on.
Yeah, I actually just saw a tweet this morning that was saying that like in Atlanta, when they speak Black vernacular, they drop off the ends of consonants, and that at some point they're just going to go full tonal and it'll be like Chinese, which is probably not correct. But it made me think about that in relationship to this book. But I entirely agree with what you're saying in terms of what you can hear versus what you read. And Kelley's able to do like both at the same time, which is crazy.
I mean, I think that's key to the whole project here. I think that like he's doing a particular thing here, but I think that's very key to like modernism. Like what are we doing here? We're like pushing all these. What are we doing when we're like pushing the conventions of like written language to like their furthest extremes and pulling out new ways of using metaphors and using puns and using these things that, we're used to seeing in like these very like staid conventional contexts. What happens when we just like turn those up to 11 and go crazy mode, go crazy style with it?
I also want to just make a brief note that apparently Kelley studied under John Hawkes, and John Hawkes is great because he's one of the earliest people who goes, plot, it stinks. He's like, I don't care about plot. I don't care about characters. He says he's more interested in landscapes, which is an incredible thing for an author to say. And he also said that people say, write what you know. I say, make it up. Who cares? Like, he's really like, and like, this is apparently extremely impactful for Kelley. And I think based on what you were saying, I think you can also see it here in terms of like, the plot is just kind of like episodes of Chig and then the other character, Carlisle, I think, or not Carlisle, and just them doing things, and then it's more about the language itself than about character or like plot. So
which fantastic.
I know, 10 out of 10.
I agree. Plot, get it out of here.
Who needs it?
Again, not to be like Black Eyes is the same, but I did find myself thinking a bit about Delaney as I was reading this too. I think that if there's something that stuck out to me there in terms of like what, I mean, because these are both guys who are writing at similar times. Even if kind of in somewhat different. I guess Delaney was also in New York, so who knows? Maybe they did meet each other at some point, or I'm sure they knew people in common. But again, the Delaney novels we've written, like even Nova, which had more of a plot, kind of also didn't.
Right.
Like it has like a journey the characters are going on, but it's not like conventionally plotted by any means. Also, Kennedy dying.
Right, yeah. The two books where Kennedy dying is a major plot point or thing that's discussed. Oh,
you're forgetting about Libra. It's all about that.
Maybe this is another sub theme as JFK is a plot in literary fiction or in fiction. So,
man, those boomers just never gonna get over that, huh?
I also
Kelley clearly does not care.
Yeah, Kelley doesn't care, and I like too that like it happens not in a like, did you hear that Kennedy died? It's like somebody makes a mistake in softball, and another guy just starts beating the guy on the field, and then the guy who's getting beaten starts crying and goes, "The president was killed!" Like, and you're just and like at that point I went, "What?" like when I was reading it. But
I mean,
Kelley does not care, and I think that comes back to the kind of like determination begins in the head thing that Ishmael Reed pointed out, where for Kelley it appears that this book is more about like realizing that like white speech is in some way kind of oppressive, and that to speak in Black vernacular is to kind of reach back to previous traditions. And I think that's also a big modernist thing, actually, which I don't know if Kelley was doing that, but the white guy modernists were obsessed with tradition in ways that they thought it would help recover what was fragmented about the modern world. And I think Kelley doesn't quite get to that, but he does, I think, gesture at Black tradition in the face of like, white oppression. So.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like we talked about this a little bit in our Flann O'Brien episode, the way that the novelist becomes kind of national consciousness, particularly at the time of people like Flann O'Brien and James Joyce, like really kind of defining Irish literature in this way. And I think that there is something there in terms of like the way that modernism, I mean, in the way that of so many things of the 20th century, used for both good and ill. If there is a nationalism, if there are two nationalisms that are fully warranted, it is Black nationalism and Irish nationalism, but also Ezra Pound.
Right. And we can we'll just sidebar that for now, I think. So,
well, but there's this way in which, like, I don't know, I think there's something interesting there about the way that, the essential amoral quality of art, even while, like, we must imagine ourselves into a different world. We also must remember that our opponents are doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and in ways that they're competing for each other. And I also want to just note that I think the other protagonist in this book is interesting because Chig is he's well educated. He's been abroad. He's trying to talk white in some scenes, even though when he says no motherfucker, he's realizing that he needs to not do that. But the other character is just, he's in Harlem. He's kind of a wheeler and dealer. There's a part where he makes $1,300 selling weed that he met like a GI. Like he meets a GI at the barbershop and the guy's like, I just got in, like, you want this weed? And he's like, sure. And he like sells it. And I think it's interesting that the plot, if we want to say there is in this book, is those two characters coming together. But they don't actually come together. And this is, again, a big plot in Ulysses. Without getting into it, but Daedalus and Leopold Bloom meet each other, and that's like the crux of the book. And so some people like to assign Chig as Leopold is an academic article I think I sent you, and Daedalus is Carlyle. But the Carlyle plot is that he has to like help a dentist get materials to divorce his wife. So he has to like sleep with her, and he has to get photos of them sleeping together. And I bring this up because I think it's an interesting like other half of this book where the first half is kind of like this, not exactly academic, but there's a lot of like, I'm doing modernism. I've got this academic character. And then this other thing is just kind of like a Harlem story, basically. So,
when I first hit the first Carlisle scene, I almost wondered if we were still in like a dream sequence.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, are we doing like a kind of like a genre like thing where Chig is dreaming that he's this like more stereotypical image of like a black man and living this more stereotypical like lifestyle, and that's like part of what's going on with this dream interlude. But no, this guy is a real, and kind of is a mirror for Chig. And like you said, there's this way in which, like, I don't know, I wonder if there's got to be something there. Again, like we said, like it's not like he is like, it's not like Kelley did not read Joyce. Like, this is, this is a book that he is intentionally and purposefully like paralleling with Joyce, and the fact that, at least if I'm understanding you correct, though, because again I have not read Joyce, Bloom and Daedalus do eventually meet, and that being the crux of that book. It feels like there's something there in the fact that Chig and Carlisle do not meet. That is some kind of commentary on the Black experience versus maybe like the Irish experience.
Well, and like without getting into the end, like I think that answering that question also depends on what you think of the ending, which we can save for later. And that's also when the book makes a reference to Finnegan's Wake. So because Finnegan's Wake has a similar ending. I also like the use of the dentist, because I feel like for a book that's really into the idea of language and oppression being linked, there's a very famous essay, like the idea of Borderlands by Gloria Anzaldúa, was about Chicano speech. And she has this image of a wild tongue where the dentist is like wrestling with her tongue. And it's kind of like a metaphor for basically being told not to speak Chicano Spanish, like speak proper Spanish, don't speak Borderland Spanish. And I was immediately thinking of that when the fact that it's like a dentist, even though they don't use it, like the dream language for Carlisle stuff is a lot different than the Chig dream language stuff. And I also like too that the dentist, I feel like, isn't there like a Chris Rock joke where he's like, in order for Black people to make it, like they have to become dentists, and like he's talking about like the rich people neighborhood where it's all like normal white people and then one dentist basically who's Black. I think that's like a Chris Rock joke, but like it's important that he picked that in terms of like middle class aspirations, because I feel like Kelley is also thinking about that too, just in terms of like making it versus not making it, which again is an experience that I'm less qualified to talk about, but I think it's definitely there. So
yeah, no, I mean, I think that I don't know, dentists, I feel like I'm qualified to speak on this as the grandson of a dentist. But you know, dentists are kind of like this very strange like crew of people, because like well known, highest suicide rate out of any profession in the world. And there's this weird way where like being a dentist, I think must be a very alienating experience in a lot of ways, because you're a doctor, but you're not a real doctor.
Yeah.
In fact, you're a doctor that everyone hates going to. I mean, I guess very few people like going to the doctor, but most people hate going to the dentist. You are like only causing people pain. And you also like, you make less than like a real doctor does. It seems like it's a much more like kind of hand to mouth existence in a lot of ways.
Was that pun intended? Yeah, like I have my hand to mouth and my hand is in another person's mouth. Anyway, yeah. So,
but I think there's something in terms of the way that like this dentist is kind of like, it's like the dentists feel like they're like, if they're, if we're talking about like the professional class, doctors, lawyers, these people who need like post-secondary education to do their jobs, dentists are like the lowest rung of that.
Yeah.
And I think that like there's something there in terms of like this dentist can flash this guy like $1,000, which yes, it's 1970. That's a lot more money than it is now, but still it's like in the grand scheme of things, not that much money.
Yeah.
And this guy Carlisle is so willing to, debase himself, to mistreat this poor woman who has done nothing wrong. Not that he like assaults her or anything, but it's a humiliating and unpleasant experience for everyone involved except for the dentist.
Right. But like I think I like that Kelley treats their interactions kind of normally. Like they actually kind of come to an understanding, him and the wife, about stuff, and like he tries to basically like convince the wife to leave so that he can get the $1,000 but not actually sleep with her. So like the Carlisle tries to kind of do the right thing in this scenario, even though he's trying to get money, is sort of like why he agrees to do it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that his standpoint is very much kind of like, well, he's just trying to like talk this poor woman through like, this is gonna happen. Like,
yeah.
your husband's gonna divorce you one way or the other. Like, you might as well take the easy way out here.
Right, which is like, that's the kind of like the what is it? It's sort of, he's sort of like a smooth talking character, we might say, compared to Chig, who's very proper. So
yeah.
And so, like, that plot line, we could talk more about that plot line or the other, because Chig's dreams are a little different. There's like one where he's like dreaming about like a politician and like a newspaper. And then there's like another one where like there's like a sort of like the tribal dream that he has. I wasn't entirely sure what was going on there. But like, yeah, his dreams. And then there's something to be said that maybe when these two characters dream, they become the same person. But I feel like I don't have enough evidence to do that. And it's kind of more of like a suggestion based on some other stuff I read. So
I think that, like, I mean, the way it kind of felt to me was that, like, it tends to be that, like, these dream sequences are interstitials between one viewpoint and the other, between Chig and Carlisle. And so I almost feel like there's kind of this idea, it's like kind of a collective unconscious thing where we're entering like the Black collective unconscious when these characters go to sleep. And that, like, is this point where they can meet, and then we can kind of switch perspectives through that world, because otherwise, we're like an entire ocean separated physically from each other.
That reminds me
kind of this shared like world of like cultural experience is like this uniting factor, even if it's like not totally coherent. I don't mean coherent as in like the book's metaphor is money. I just mean like the world itself is not made coherent by the existence of this cultural common ground.
Yeah, and I think the transitions between those two viewpoints, like you said, are really well done, because it's almost like he turns the temperature down on the dream speech, where like it's suddenly,
it's really cool.
Yeah, it's like suddenly like you just drift out of it, and it's not like a cut. Like it's very much like I'm turning the temperature down, and suddenly it's like we're back in a like quote unquote normal depiction. Even though, like you were saying, the dream stuff kind of connects the two characters.
Yeah. What do we want to talk about from here? Because we got a lot.
We do.
Still.
I mean, do you want to like finish the Chig plot line and then like talk about the ship and then talk about Carlisle, or yeah. So one of the things that's great about the Chig plot line is that he's sort of interested in a painter, I think, in the group before he says no motherfucker, and it's implied that they got together, but then she left him, and then they get reunited on like a cruise ship, and there are some really weird characters on this cruise ship, putting it mildly. Chig is like rooming with these two younger white people, and they're involved in this like Hitler youth group that's never exactly spelled well.
The TYO, the Tavazian Youth Organization.
Yeah, and there's a guy that's like in charge of them called Mr. Oglethorpe, and he's maybe like got some Odin-esque like coding where he pulled his own eye out, and it's very confusing, and basically like the young couple aren't supposed to have sex, but like Chig can hear them having sex in the bunk because they're in the same room. And like while he's like running around dealing with these like annoying white people, he sees Wendy, and they have who's like this
painter
who's the painter
kind of love interest,
and they like try to get back together, but like it doesn't quite work. And then she basically like is racist to him as well. And then they come across what might be slaves in the ship. And when Chick is like, I should save these people that I think are slaves, he comes back and they're gone. They've been moved, and it's been turned into like a boxing gym. That the slave reveal was like, I was like, whoa, I don't understand what's going on here at all in this scene. Like, I was like, I have some thoughts about that, but what did you think about all of this, like, these escapades on this cruise ship, basically, and like the weird, like the TYO youth group? Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of like a surreal like sequence.
Yeah,
and it's one of those bits where like there is I wish I had like a concise term for this, but I don't know. The best way I can put it is, you remember all those like twee little like winks in Major Arcana that kind of annoyed me.
Yeah.
This is like if Cool Guy did that. There's a lot of stuff here where it's like just these little interesting like winks that I feel like my personal life experience has just made me like a little more adept at and again, I'm sure a ton of them went over my head, but like Mr. or Dr. Oglethorpe is the guy who is leading this like earnest youth group. And James Oglethorpe was the British like explorer or like governor or whatever who founded Georgia.
Oh wow!
Like the state of Georgia.
Okay.
So there's something going on there in terms of this guy named Oglethorpe like taking a slave ship across the Atlantic. There's even kind of throughout the dream sequences, there are kind of these weird little like, again, like puns that are like very subtly weaving in like Norse mythological references. Even earlier in the book.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a point where like something like Ymir Eternity or something like that. So there's something.
Wotan is in here somewhere too at some point.
Yes. But Tivaz, because he's using the old German spelling, is Tyr, the Norse god of war and justice, who sticks his hand in Fenrir's mouth. I don't know why exactly he would be the god that we'd be picking. Oh wait, because he's the one who sticks his hand in Fenrir's mouth when they bind him with all the chains.
And there's also the dentist thing again. like the idea of like sticking your hand in somebody's mouth is, it feels like that's an image somewhere in here. So
no, I think there might be something there. I'm not. That's one of those ones where I'm like, okay, is that am I seeing things? Am I making connections that are not like consciously there? Is this something that Kelley was doing like on purpose, or is this something going on like unconsciously? I don't even know, but it feels like this is this bit where like we kind of, I mean, there's been like something like subtly like surreal throughout the whole book, but this like feels like the point where like dream reality and like physical reality have fully like merged. Even if maybe the language doesn't quite point to that, in that like this is written in like the more matter of fact like Chig section language, just the descriptions of things, the actions that are happening, the plot, as it were, like is like somehow even more like out there than when we were in kind of back in Europe. Like things have just gotten like more crazy and less sensible and legible to our poor Chig.
Well, and regarding the slaves, I've seen there's two ways to read that, where I think I originally read that as like, oh, like this is like about self-determination first, and then you can help other people. And that's why Chig is not able to save the slaves. However, I read another academic essay that I sent you where they suggested that like Chig just was misapprehending the situation, that they weren't slaves. And also that Wendy might be white passing. And since Chig is too obsessed with dating white women, he didn't realize it. Which if that's the case, that went completely over my head, given his interactions with Wendy. And also she's racist to him. So like, I don't know how much, I don't know if that interpretation makes sense in terms of like the Wendy thing, plus the whether or not there's slaves on the ship or not. But I like the idea of Chig not quite having his house in order yet in order to help other people. And I think that kind of checks out with like where this book ends up.
Well, crucially, one thing we forgot to mention is the slaves that he finds in the ship. They speak French.
Yes.
They don't speak English. So there's kind of this lost in translation quality where he's trying to communicate with them to figure out like what's going on. And they're kind of like, oui.
Yeah, they said ha ha ha. Yeah, and then there was not enough time to further communicate with them.
Which makes sense because I heard that this book was at least partially inspired by Kelley deciding to learn French to communicate with Francophone African people he was meeting.
Well, the Kelley journey is crazy because he got out of America. He said when they killed Malcolm X, he knew the movement was over. And so he got to Paris. And then in the interview I found, he said that he was watching his daughter start talking like a French person. And then he realized that he's like, that means she's just going to be as racist as French people. And he realized that he traded one racism for another, at which point he said, screw it, we're going to Jamaica. And they basically moved to Jamaica, and they were in Jamaica, and then they were essentially forced, like deported back to America. And he said when he was in Jamaica, he learned how to speak Jamaican patois. And that was like another really like eye-opening experience for him in terms of language. And he was actually writing in vernacular in his journal. And so that also might have been an impetus for this book, is the idea of speaking, like writing in patois to keep the practice when he was leaving Jamaica. And it's worth noting now that if this makes it into the pre-show preamble or not, that Kelley is on the record for one of the first people to like put the word woke in a paper of record. And the paper was about, it was published in New York Times, 1962. And it's about seeing a sign that says how to speak beatnik and realizing that that's just how to speak black, that the beatniks were just stealing black vernacular in order to be cool. And he basically is setting the record straight in that essay.
Man, more things change, the more they stay the same. Huh?
Yeah, it's almost like the U.S. never addressed its racial inequity problem. So.
But almost like we're doubling down on them.
So, but I think, like, to your point, I think that sort of failure to communicate is definitely there in the ship scene. And we should also we'll turn the dial and look at what Carlisle is doing, where his friend has maybe been conned by the devil to save his mother. And so Carlisle is going to get his friend out of a bind where he owns the devil, his soul, because he needed money to help his sick mother. His friend Houston, I think. Is his name Houston? I think.
Wait. What is his name?
Also, what did you think about the scene where his barber Butterfly basically
is it Hondo?
Hondo, that's what it is, not Houston. Yeah. What do you think about the scene where his barber Butterfly like makes a pass at him and he's just kind of like, thanks, but I'm not interested. Like, or something.
I mean, what else do you expect when you're going to the nude barber?
I also really liked the Butterfly character because I feel like it's another, like, the Butterfly character talks differently than Carlisle does, and it's rendered very well. So
no, I agree. Yeah, I mean, different characters like have very distinct voices, despite this not really being like a character novel.
Yeah.
In that way, like this isn't really like a character study of Chig. We don't learn a ton about like his background or his childhood or anything like that. But yeah, different characters. I mean, even just between like our two viewpoint characters, like Carlisle and Chig, like not just like talk differently, but like think differently outside of, again, kind of this dream realm where maybe their thoughts are blending together a little bit. And it does give these sections, like it's kind of amazing, like how he's able to like switch between so many different like registers in such a short book. Yeah. And not have it feel like stunted.
It's only 200 pages.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Also, apparently that's the thing he got from John Hawkes, because John Hawkes was like, you don't need to write like a 300-page book. Was one of the things that John Hawkes was like insistent about. So
I agree.
I really like this bit from the Carlisle section where, along with all these registers, he also has time for an epic list, which is something that Joyce also likes to do. So this is the name of all the bars in Harlem. The limousine took a right going south, stopped at the corner of the street, went right again, passing bars, BQ's, Hare's Lair, the Brown Turtle, the Oasis Palm, Jesse B's Joyce Club, Brown's, Mr. Mighty's Blessed Diner, Melvin's Jazzmatazz Gallery, Smokey's Smoother Room, Reinhardt's Restaurant, TM's Dream Room, Sonny R's Boom Bar, the Johnson Jones jailhouse, all of them open, flashing, and filling up until a light caught them at the clock by the diamond store. Also, he makes time for a James Joyce nod in there and a Turtle and Rabbit reference, because Turtle and Rabbit are two dream characters that show up in the last section as like Western desperados. Did you pick up on that?
I did not.
Yeah, so in the last dream section, it basically becomes like a Western radio play, which apparently was like a big influence on Melvin Kelley growing up, where like if you catch into what the last dream section is doing, Turtle and Rabbit, who are like African folktale heroes, are transmogrified into Western heroes, and they go on like 2 adventures, and there's a commercial break. Like, it's really like incredible how much he manages to cram into this book. And so Turtle and Rabbit show up in the last bit, and they are instrumental to the ending, which is also the beginning of this book, which is sort of weird to think about. But yeah, so Carlisle saves his friend from the devil by paying Butterfly $1,300 to ram Butterfly's car into the devil's car. And the devil is just like some white guy running a con. And somehow this works. And whose mechanics are slightly confusing to me. And Hondo escapes from the devil, and Carlisle gets to save the day. At which point, Chig ends up at the same bar that Carlisle's at now, because he's left the cruise ship. He's returned to America from his exile in Europe, and he's just sitting at the bar being depressed. And that's where like the realist, in quotes, narrative ends. And then we get like the last dream chapter.
Yes. Yeah. It does, like, I will say, I mean, this book can be hard to follow at points.
Incredibly so. And the only reason that I was able to say that is because I consulted some secondary sources, and then I went back and reread some sections. So, but
now I will say, compared to some other modernist novels, this was only 200 pages. You can just give it another reread if you feel so inclined. Which I think I will be doing at some point. But yes, I do feel like I kind of lost track of the plot at a certain point with particularly the Carlisle plot.
Yeah.
Just because it does kind of feel like that one is even more episodic than the Chig plot. Because it feels like we kind of go from this like thing with the dentist to like this thing with his friend to like his barber to like, yeah, it just feels like it gets a little all over the place. Not necessarily a bad thing. Like we said, it's meandering, and that's what it's going for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the whole devil plot is interesting.
But there's also like an attractive older white woman who has $20,000 that is, I think, in on the scheme with the devil. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's one of those things where it's like I was trying to like puzzle out what was going on there, and I'm like, okay, well, the really like kind of boring reading is like, oh yeah, like the devil's just some white guy, because like that's what white people do. They trick black people into thinking that they have all this power when it's all the material, baby.
Yeah.
But that feels like almost too boring for this book. Like I feel like there has to be something that's going over my head there a little bit, because that feels like just kind of a very like standard metaphor.
Yeah.
But I do just love the bit where Hondo is like describing his travails to Carlisle. Carlisle's like, damn, if I was going to sell my soul to the devil, I would have made sure my mom lived forever.
Yeah, he's like,
my friend sure is a moron who got a bad deal.
Well, that's like a perfectly on brand thing for him to say too, which is like, no, yeah, you just did a bad deal. Like, yeah. So.
Deals are his art form.
Yeah, he just could have been better. And so like he has to wheel and deal to save him, because he buys all that weed off the GI, he sells it. I think Kelley might have sold weed in Jamaica, if you read in between the lines of the interview. So there might be something there too. And then so the dream section, the last one, if you wade through the Western stuff, I found really moving, because in the dream, it's, I think, implied that Rabbit and Turtle, Western desperados, basically announced to the dream version of Carlisle and Chig that you didn't get it. We're sending you back. You need to figure out how to talk. They basically say that to him at the end. You need to figure out how to shift your voice depending on who you're talking to. Otherwise, you're going to be trapped. And there's the way that these traditionally African folklore characters are saying this that suggests like a return to tradition, which is Kelley's deal, as well as we could even say the modernist deal more broadly. But also the ending line is recursive because as they say in the final line, it wraps around to the first chapter. The final line is man be, gold be, and then it ends with boy. And so Kelley has glossed this line, hopefully, in the interview where he talks about how capitalism took African people and turned them into money and then infantilized them. And that's an interesting connection to slang, where the idea of saying, hey, man, that was the thing that jazz musicians would say to each other to give each other proper respect, because white people would call them boy. And so it's interesting that like this wraps around to the first chapter and Chig wakes up. And that also means that his white friends were calling him boy, which means, as we've said, they're not that great. But also like the lesson has not been learned yet. And so you're basically sent through the book again. And in Finnegan's Wake, the same thing happens, but it's related to like Joyce was smoking some Giambasti Vico pack about the recursion cycles of history. I don't want to get into that. It's probably how he structured the book, but I feel like Kelley does it very purposefully here in terms of like learning a lesson and what he wants the reader to take from this book, especially the black reader, I would say. And again, I found the ending incredibly moving because there's this feeling of like, you didn't get it, like do it again, like figure your shit out, basically. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like that too, because I think that, if we maybe would compare this, I mean, again, maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're referencing with Joyce there, but, there's kind of Nietzschean eternal recurrence.
Yeah.
Which is, this thing where it's like, oh yeah, you're just going to repeat the same stuff over and over again. I feel like this is something I've talked about on the show before. I always like it when, we do get this chance of transcending our circumstances. It's like the fact that they're being sent back, it is not because, humanity is just doomed to repeat like its sins over and over and over again, and to just be ignorant and miserable for all time. Like there is a lesson, it can be learned. And if we learn it, like, we can repair, our circumstances. We can repair the world in some way. Or, maybe "we" is not quite the right word here, because I guess I'm not really part of the the equation here, being a white person. But still, like I agree with you. I think there's something there in terms of like the fact that it's framed as like you have not learned how to speak. Again, when I think about modernism versus postmodernism, I know I've been a little flippant today talking about, writing the English language like a $5 horse. But I think when I think about like what I find so inspiring about modernism, and maybe like what I find meaningful in modernism, maybe I feel is like lacking in postmodernism, it is this sense of like, maybe not like so much reading mattering so much as like language has value. And that value is like in some ways very ephemeral, but there is like a utility. There is something to be found in the exploration of language, of speech, of writing. It's not just kind of an arcane, word game, or a way to reflect like the inherent meaninglessness of the world. Like I think sometimes it can become in postmodern work. I think that it's like, oh yeah, by pushing these things, this thing, language that shapes our minds in ways like we can barely understand. Like I'm not a linguist, I'm not a neuroscientist, but we're still discovering like the way that like having language the way that we do like affects our brains, and like our brains affect language. And that's just talking about it from a strictly materialist level. But it's like, oh, if we change this thing, if we use this thing in an unexpected way, like what can that do? And I'm not saying it's like, oh, this is enough to like transcend the limits of material reality or anything, but I think that there is something important in that. Important in pointing out like language is not a given. Language is not like sacred. Language can be, yeah, you can ride the English language like a $5 horse and make it, perform circus tricks for you.
And I like that you brought up like language too, because I feel like with Kelley, it's more about voice and speaking. And the fact that he's writing a book is like an excuse to basically do that. And if you read some of his interviews, he talks about, like I mentioned, his first love was the radio. He loves doing impressions. And in the interview, he starts like doing Jamaican patois to like make a point to the interviewer, like where he talks about like chopping his herb and like describing how in Jamaica they would yell at him if he wasn't doing the patois right. Like they would basically be like, no, talk Jamaican. And he'd be like, and then he would do it. So, but I think like to me, I'm always interested in when books are also more vernacular, because I feel like it's a cool intersection between, written and spoken language. And I think that interplay is kind of what you're getting at in terms of like the possibilities of it are inexhaustible. And that's also why I like reading modernism, because I think I feel renewed at the possibilities of what stuff can do, where with postmodernism, it can be like exhausting. Like it's like all right, like I know you're the one telling the tale. Like, so like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, if there's something I find meaningful in that kind of like return to tradition kind of element of modernism, it is the way that it questions some of our assumptions about like how these things work in a way that like I feel like people act like postmodernism does.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, I think there's something much more like interesting and maybe even like revolutionary about like trying to break down the divide between like spoken and written language compared to like what a lot of postmodernism is doing, which I think is like really reifying like written language.
Yeah, like drawing attention to the fact that you're reading the book. And I mean, that's like, without getting into Derrida, that's like the whole speaking versus writing thing, where he talks about how like it's reversed in one way or in the other. And that's, the whole skepticism towards meaning being like fixed. So
yeah. And I mean, and I feel like there is something there again with kind of the way that this is harkening back to folk tales and this kind of maybe earlier way of interfacing with reality in a way through kind of like vernacular language. Again, like I feel like I don't have like a fully developed like telos here, but I just think that like what I like about modernism is just the way that it challenges, I think, some of these assumptions while still feeling like there is a telos, even if like that telos is obscure. I feel like if anything, maybe this is a book that has like a slightly more legible telos. Yeah. Even if I don't think it's like prescriptive or like moralizing, I feel like, this is a book that does like have an idea of like the world it wants to create compared to maybe some other modernist texts. I don't, Nightwood, beautiful, striking, etc. I don't think that book like has an idea of like the world it wants to make. In the same way.
Yeah. And I think that's also related to like just the idea of getting people to think about what words they're using. Cause I feel like that's like, that doesn't summarize the whole project here, but just the idea of like, like speaking, you can speak in two different ways at once, and you should be aware of that. You should be aware of like talking cool is probably racialized if you think about it for like 5 seconds. Like, but
Well, I wanted to bring this up because I was thinking about this as we were talking about kind of the woke beatnik article and sort of this way that white people have been stealing black people's language for I mean at least at this point like 100 years, probably before that, and I just don't know about it yet. But there's something that I always find a little strange, and that genuinely is like how like there's no reason white people like what we as white people like can't come up with our own like cool slang. Like there's no like structural like thing that's different with our brains. It's just, I understand there's like structural societal reasons like why we want to like use the language of like the subaltern and things like that, even if I don't have like a perfect understanding of it. But it's like, I do think that if there is something like we could take away from this book, it's like, yeah, language isn't exhaustible. Like we can also like reinvent the way we talk. We don't have to talk like the white characters in this book. We don't have to understand the world in the same way that the white people in this book do. Not saying that that's like what this book is about, but I think that like as a white person, there's only so many things I can like take for my own life from this book, and I think that like that's what maybe I'm taking away from it.
Well, and that's worth pointing out too, because I think there's two minds of this book where you could say, well, this isn't for me, I shouldn't read it. Which I think, again, this is the woke season. I think we're arguing why it could be for you, but also two, the idea that like this pun language stuff is nonsense. And a lot of the current reception of this book from white reviewers when it came out was that he was being he was trying too hard. He was being cool for the sake, like he was like, I'm going to great lengths to reinvent the novel that I'm writing, made up gobbledygook, which I think if anything, we're trying to say that's not the case. Now, there are many people that think that's what Finnegan's Wake is, which it's not. And so I think like there's something to be said for reading outside your comfort zone, for reading about issues that don't relate to you, and as well as in reading in different ways of representing that you're not familiar with. But I think that also involves accepting that you may not get it all. And I think some people don't like that. And I think I'm definitely fallen prey to that, where I'm like, well, I can't understand this, so I may not even try. And I think that's, I think it's worth it to try anyway, because you might get something out of it. So, and who's to say you may not even know what you get out of it. So.
Yeah, something that I feel like I struggle with a lot, Ben, and you can tell me if you feel the same way. Like I do feel a lot of pressure to like understand what I'm reading and like basically like, approaching every book like it is like an orange, and I'm trying to squeeze every last like drop of juice from it. In one read, because like I feel like I don't have like I both feel like I don't have the time to like go back and reread things, and I also don't feel like I feel like I'm stupid if I can't like pull everything out of a text in one go. That reminds me of my favorite Gas quote. People read too fast nowadays. They eat too fast too. Okay, sorry. What were you gonna say? No. I mean, I do think it's genuinely like it's a particular like pathology of mine, but I feel like it's a particular pathology of like the specific phase of modernity we're in, where it's like, you can basically get any book ever written in history for free on the internet if you just look in the right places. Same thing with, again, like, man, sometimes I kind of wish that you couldn't watch movies at home. It's just like, sometimes I think about like how we've just had this proliferation of different ways of like entertaining ourselves, and it's made like choosing to do anything feels so fraught, because you're like, well, there's 10 other things I could be doing right now. But I don't have a solution to that, except, I guess to challenge myself by reading stuff like this and being okay with not getting it all at once.
Right. And I think that's hard. I mean, you can tell, like, I read a bunch of secondary lit because I wanted to be able to say something coherent. So I wasn't even able to really do what I'm saying, because if I was, I would have just read this book and stuck with only this book and had my thoughts about it. So it's a tough thing, but I think if there's something to advocate for reading, I think reading is something that allows you to do that. And I think with movies too, like technically you could just rewatch a tough movie and figure it out, but we want to make sure our time's being spent well. And that was also, I think, one of the attractions for this book only being 200 pages, where I was like, 200 pages, like, it's not like Finnegan's Wake, because Finnegan's Wake is like, I think 600 pages. And I think only like the last 200 are legible in their traditional sense. And so like, again, like that's a tall ask. And that's another interesting thing about modernism, is the idea of like modernism wasn't for the masses. And that's something to think about, I think, with this book, is it's clearly trying to make modernism more accessible to a wider audience. But like, if you scratch a modernist, you'll get an elitist. And by that, I mean like, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, like that, the white, cadre of people. Shit, even Virginia Woolf. I don't know if you saw on Twitter, people were saying that Virginia Woolf hated James Joyce because he was poor, which like she definitely was being catty about it, but in a very aristocratic way, I would say. So I don't know, like, I feel like we're getting far afield, but this is definitely like a far afield conversation and book. But I think, like, to your point, it can be hard to decide what to do. And I think being more open with, like, maybe not getting something, I think might just lead to a more, a general outlook that's more curious, I think, which I think is good. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't want to, like, get on my fucking soapbox here or anything like that, but I think that when we were talking about kind of the idea of this season and like what were we trying to do by like really consciously being like no white guys, what was the point of that? And I think that has like pushed us to read like some really interesting and kind of like off the wall books. Like I mean, as much as I didn't enjoy reading A Court of Thorns and Roses, like that was something I wouldn't have read unless I was consciously trying to like read against like the grain of like where my brain like just kind of naturally tells me to go.
Right.
And, I think that like if you presented me with this book at A Court of Thorns and Roses, I would have picked this book. But I also like don't know if this is just like a book amongst like 30 books that were just like on my shelf or available to read for some class or something. Like, would this have been the one that jumped out at me? Maybe not. Maybe so. But I'm really glad that I read it. And, I think that, it can feel like it can feel hard sometimes, like just to pick what to read. And sometimes it is good to just kind of like force yourself to, I don't even want to be like, eat your vegetables. That's not what I mean. But just like, getting out of your comfort zone is good.
Yeah. And, especially as everyone likes to say in this algorithmically driven age of ours where we can get as much as we want all the time based on our data. So, yeah. Yeah.
If you zig enough, the algorithm can't zag with you. You can free yourself.
Yeah, but not until you've learned your lesson. So, yeah.
Well, anything else we want to talk about before we call it a day on Dunfords Travels Everywheres?
I wanted to ask you, John, this will be my last thing. Did your digital copy have illustrations?
Yes, actually, I kind of am surprised that we haven't brought up the illustrations because they are really good.
They're really good. They're done by his wife. And apparently his wife and him basically would do art together. So what you're seeing is something that was like more or less done at the same time as he was writing the book, not like something that's done like after the fact, which I think is really interesting. I also like how some of them, though, like will have a character and you'll be like, I don't even know who that is. Like I think one of my favorites is like, look, it's Jiggle Body Jackson. And I'm just like, should I know who that is? But I will say they are great. And I think to me, they really improve the experience of reading the book because you'll be like, oh, I'm now entering the dream dimension. So which is nice for like a cue. So.
Yeah, again, like I feel like that first section with the towers was pretty key for me in my enjoyment of this book, and that's the first illustration.
Yeah,
as of the Turas in the weird Decretio country, and like flipping that page and like having that picture show up and being like, whoa. We're cooking with gas.
Yeah, and also like the dream thing is giving its own splash page, or like the first dream where suddenly it's like, may we go on with the reconstruction, Mr. Chiggle, awake now? Like, and you're like, what's about to happen? So.
Yeah, Ben, great pick.
Thanks, Sean. I think this is, like I said, I go crazy during the springtime and I want to start throwing curveballs. So I think this one turned out well.
Yeah. Well, we're going to remain in the modernist dimension here on our next episode. We're going to be reading a couple stories by one of the greats, Gertrude Stein. So we hope you'll join us back here in 2 weeks to talk about those. Ben, anything else you want to tell the nice folks out in podcast land?
Nothing except just keep reading and read stuff that you might not like.
I'm not going to say don't read stuff you might not like. Read stuff that you haven't considered reading, maybe.
Yeah, okay, that's better. Yeah, read stuff that you haven't considered reading. I imagine
I made people miserable, Ben. This book wasn't a chore.
Well, yeah, I guess what I mean is like taking a risk. Taking a risk is good. So
yeah, get out of your comfort zone. Take some risks. They're just books. They can't hurt you.
Yeah,
it's just words on a page. You're scared of words?
You can close the book and walk away.
Just close your eyes.
All right, we should probably end it.
Yep. Well, have fun, folks. Until next time, I've been John.
I've been Ben.
Semper Books.
Semper Books.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir.